Hey guys, we're here for Friday, May 15th. Just a couple days left here, right? If you haven't taken a shot at the questions from the email, go ahead and do that before you watch how to solve these. Okay. Okay, guys. So for number one, first of all, the big key is it says that we are in a long run equilibrium. Now, I know that you don't have to draw any graphs, but the only questions that we have, the only problems that they give us that have us just writing the answers are those two that I've sent you so far. So anyway, we're starting out in this long run equilibrium here. And then we're going to say that consumer confidence falls. Basically, very similar to maybe what happens right now with the coronavirus, right? Where people are not sure how much money they're going to make. They're not sure when their business are opening up. So we're going to see a decrease in demand as people stop spending money, right? And so anyway, our decrease in aggregate demand there, it has us label it. We'll do that real quick, right? And anyway, that's where we should be. Obviously, that causes a recessionary gap. Doesn't use that term, but we've seen that word obviously quite a bit as we move forward. All right, the next part has us drawn on Phillips curve here. What's happened now? Obviously, originally the question they have you label this point A, right? Our long run equilibrium point. Maybe the question they would ask you, and the things that we've seen is what would happen to the point on the graph after that decrease in confidence. And we've seen some of the questions, if you've done them, it says it's going to slide up and to the left, down to the right, shift left, shift right. We've seen some of those things. So in this case, obviously your answer would be, hopefully, it's going to slide down and to the right. But if you drew that, you're on the right track. All right, part D, is taking us back to our original graph. It's just asking you what's going to happen with the transfer payments. Sorry. Let me back up. Sorry, I skipped a problem there. So part D is asking us, all right, if the government doesn't do anything, people are making less money. What's going to happen to the transfer payments in Meekland? Well, we're going to increase those transfer payments. More people qualify, right? Due to their lower incomes. Alrighty. So anyway, pretty straightforward. We've seen those problems before. Part E, the talking about the demand and supply for loanable funds. All right. This is that crowding out effect that we talk about. The eventual increase in demand for borrowing money from the government. Okay, by the government, and interest rates are going to increase. All right. And then part F, it's asking us, what happens to the short run aggregate supply curve? Is it going to shift to the left, to the right, or remain unchanged if, any of those changes in fiscal and monetary policy happen? Remember, what's going to happen here, it doesn't have you draw the graph. It's explaining, that's going to shift back to the right, right? This short run aggregate supply is going to shift back to the right because people start accepting lower wages. So again, that is a question that they can definitely ask you on the tests that we've seen. All right, but due to lower wages and other inputs of production. Okay, that's number one for you. Skip number two. You don't need to do it. That's the topic that we don't need to cover. Number three, we'll go over here together. Okay, I picked this particular question solely for this this type of question here, this GDP and dealing with a little bit of inflation. So I believe that we talked about GDP. You guys took your own notes on a lot of the GDP, inflation, and unemployment back during my paternity leave. And so maybe we didn't touch base on it as much. I'll be honest, I don't necessarily remember how much we touched base on it on a face-to-face basis. But anyway, it's a good chance to review. All right, I have my notes, my PowerPoints also attached. They're a little bit unorganized. I apologize for that. But you can skim through those, maybe take your own notes on those and refamiliarize yourself with some of this stuff. Okay, so anyway, GDP, the first question here is, what's our nominal GDP? And then it's going to add to what's the real GDP. So nominal GDP is just, it is what it is. Okay, so it's asking us about 2010. Okay, so what's our nominal GDP from 2010? So GDP is the market value of all goods and services produced within a period of time in a country. Okay, so we've just got to figure out, we've got our quantities here, okay, and we've also obviously got our prices. So what we've got to do is we got to multiply 8 times 250, 10 times 10, 5 times 5, add them all together. Okay, so I went ahead and did the math there. You can see I got 8 times 250 plus 10 times 10 plus 5 times 5, 20 plus 100 plus 25 equals 145. Again, that's our nominal GDP, okay? Now, the problem with nominal GDP is we have obviously inflation, right? Prices go up, and in certain cases, not always, right? It might look like we're producing more stuff, but by the dollar amount, but we're not because of inflation. So sometimes we like to compare things from one year to the next. And so the way that we figure out our real GDP, okay, which is just a definition that you've got to remember, it's not difficult to do, is we've got to take, and again, this is real GDP for 2010, okay? We've got to take our 2010 quantity and we've got to multiply it by our 2009 price. Okay, so if we're comparing the two, obviously 2009 to 2010, we've got to take the quantity produced times that 2009 price, basically to make it equal as far as what we're trying to compare. Okay. All right, I went ahead and did it. I set it up for you. If you're doing this, you're in pretty good shape. And we haven't had too much practice at that. I've only gotten one or two of you guys' responses from the online version of from Wednesday. So, and I know somebody said that they were super confused on what they were doing. So it's a good chance to review it. It's not a super hard concept, but I do know that we did not talk very much about it, and it would not surprise me if it is on the question. Simply because usually these types of questions are the multiple choice parts on the AP test, and obviously there is no multiple choice. So anyway, keeping that in mind. All right, next part we're going to talk about inflation. Okay, so part B talking about inflation. And they talk about the price index. Okay, so the price index is simply what is referred to as a basket of goods that are kind of added together to make sure that we get a halfway or as accurate as possible representation of what prices are actually doing. Okay, so in the price index, it's also called consumer price index in the notes that you can read through. There's like 300 things in there. They're like milk, eggs, gasoline, all the things that like a normal person's going to buy on a day-to-day basis. What's not on there? Yachts, Ferraris, things that not everyday people might buy. And so it's just trying to get as accurate of a representation as possible. They give you the price index of 50 in year one, okay, to 55 in year two. So formula here, our price change divided by the original price. We've got 5 divided by 50 times 100. You should get a 10% inflation rate in that particular case. So we can use this real versus nominal also with our wages. And so part C is asking us our wage rate increasing by 3%, okay, higher or lower than, it says, assume that next year's wage rate will be 3% higher than this year's because of inflationary expectations, okay? The actual inflation rate is 4%. At the beginning of next year, will the real wages be higher, lower, or the same as today? So our increase in wages is going to be our nominal increase, okay? That's what we're actually getting, okay? However, that raise is frozen, so to speak, and our actual inflation actually became 4%. Okay, so our real wages, okay, are actually negative 1%. We're actually making less money in that particular case. They don't ask you for that. Real wages are, in this case, going to be lower. So banks try to do the same thing, and you can kind of use this same formula in the same way, but the banks are going to try to predict the inflation rate too. And so their nominal interest rate that they're charging is 3. However, on part D, it talks about what the actual inflation rate is. Now, we've got to assume when they don't tell us differently that the person is getting the raise equal to inflation, okay? So the bank has this particular situation. The bank has a real return of negative 1%, okay, which is bad for the bank, okay, but it's asking you who benefits. So Sarah is benefiting due to that higher than expected inflation on her loan.